What's going on, everybody? This is Milo, and I'm Asante.
And I'm Abby.
And this is the Life Outside the Box podcast.
Today, we're interviewing Mikayla about the pressures of elite performance.
Trust me, it's going to be a good one. You're going to learn a lot, so please do stay tuned.
And thank you so much for Cameco for sponsoring this episode.
Mikayla, first things first, maybe you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe what you're passionate about.
I'm Mikayla. I am currently working in research and content and writing, kind of all that arena, primarily with mental health and sports psychology. So those are kind of the two that I'm passionate about and how those intersect. And also just how science and creativity and writing and the arts all intersect as well, because I think that's a really cool point of intersection that doesn't get talking about a lot. So love working in that space. What else? I'm a former NCAA athlete. I played at Stanford, graduated in 2020. Not the most ideal year to graduate in, but we made it work. And yeah, I'm currently training to play overseas next year. So
nice.
Yeah.
So, you say all that stuff like it's like a super normal thing, but it's like, yeah, I just played at Stanford, like they won the national championship. But anyway, yeah, congratulations on all that.
I'm kind of starstruck by like your athleticism. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. Anyway, so I wanted to just like get things started. What first got you into basketball? Like, how did you discover it?
Yeah, so this is a really funny story, actually, because up until I was like 7 or 8, I wanted to be a ballerina. Like I was dead set on being a ballerina.
That's in everyone.
Yeah. So I did dance classes and I kept being told like, you're too tall, you can't do this. And I remember one day, like I kind of wandered over to like the window that like overlooked the gym. So the dance classroom was like above where the court was. And so I was looking out the window and I was seeing this like basketball camp happening. And I was like, that kind of looks cool. And then that's honestly how it started. I asked like if I could try it, and yeah.
How old were you at the time?
8, somewhere around there. Yeah.
Okay.
Was it like was it like
go
something
ahead.
specific about basketball that you liked, or was it just like kind of a calling?
Good question. I don't know. Yeah, no, it just looked fun, like just bouncing an orange ball and throwing it in an orange circle. Who doesn't do that? Yeah.
How did you first start playing? How did you go from discovery to playing? And maybe tell us a little bit about how that journey started.
I started going to like super simple, like Saturday morning skills and drills kinds of sessions. And I just started to really like it. And I really liked that competitive side of it of, I can be better than I was last weekend, or be better than the person next to me. And by nature, I'm not a very like competitive person, at least outwardly. I'm more shy and reserved. And I kind of found like that competitive part of myself in basketball. And I also think basketball was a bit of an escape for me. And it felt like a safe place to like be real and just like let out all my energy and anger from some things that were happening in my life at the time when I was young, just at home. And I was drawn to that, and that carried through very much for the rest of my at least young career, teenage years. Yeah.
Did you ever feel like your like escapism to basketball kind of, did it start out being like kind of a positive outlet and then slowly just turn into like maybe this isn't what I should be focusing on?
Yeah. I think every athlete kind of experiences this too, like how strongly your identity becomes rooted in your performance and your sport, regardless of like how much you love it. And I think that's something that athletes are not taught either, is that you can burn out doing something that you love. And I definitely love basketball. Like, I almost think of it as like this friendship that I developed with it. And yeah, it started out as a very positive thing, and then it manifested into a bit of an obsession. And I think any elite athlete like teeters on that line, like when they're training and going to the gym for hours and hours and hours, like it's a dedication that's just unparalleled, I think, anywhere else. Like, I think about Kobe, like all the stories of him going to the gym at 3 o'clock in the morning. I didn't quite do that, but it's like the mindset is very relatable. So it definitely manifested, into something that was borderline, maybe unhealthy.
And, so maybe, my next question is kind of touching on that, which is, a thing that I've heard from a lot of athletes, especially those who like played at a high level and did well, is, the impact of what happens when the sport becomes your entire identity. Maybe can you speak a little bit about that?
For sure, yeah. And this is one of the things that I get to study, fortunately, and it's something called identity foreclosure. And it happens typically in youth because, or like especially in your young teenage years, because your brain is more vulnerable to change. And it's still growing and learning and adapting to environments. And so identity foreclosure is essentially when you kind of root yourself entirely in one identity and you close your mind off to any other like explorations of who you are and what you might be interested in or passionate about. And I think that's very, very rooted in the culture of athletics, where, your performance is your self-worth, and those get intertwined very early on. And the reason it's so strong is because it happens in youth when your brain is still developing. And yeah, something I'm researching and trying to change and shed more light on.
So touching on like the article that you wrote for Inspire magazine and talking about like how your personal life kind of affects your like your performance, did you ever find that you were basing your entire worth, like when maybe your personal life wasn't the greatest, your worth and like your identity on your sports performance?
Absolutely. And I think that's definitely one of the things that led me down some very dark spirals in my freshman year at Stanford. Had a really, really hard time because I think I would have had those mental health struggles anyways, just based on my past and my upbringing and a few other things. And we know mental health is social determinants of health, so it's all impacted. But I think, that was going to happen anyway, but I didn't have anything to turn to, because I'd always been turning to basketball as my escape and as my like, okay, I'm still worth something because I'm good at basketball. And all of a sudden, depression and OCD and other things I was dealing with at the time started to filter into basketball and the way I was performing. And I wasn't able to compete and play the way that I had been previously. And then I didn't have anything else to fall back on. And so I spiraled down into a very dark place. So
there are multiple layers to your journey, obviously, and I'm curious, at what point during your basketball career did your mental health challenges begin?
Yeah, I would say, I was kind of in a weird case, something like OCD, which I'm formally diagnosed with. That usually starts when you're younger, and it did for me when I was very young, kindergarten. So I'd kind of dealt with that throughout my childhood and my teenage years and now, but I didn't really have any coping mechanisms other than, for some reason, my obsessions, compulsions didn't come up when I was playing. The depression side of things, which ultimately kind of made everything worse and compounded everything, was my later teenage years. So like, I don't know, 16, 17, 18, around there. So my junior, senior year of high school, and definitely carried those through into college. So
Did you ever like you mentioned how basketball was like your safe zone kind of. Like when everything else was going wrong, it was just like basketball was there. And what like did you ever have a point in your life when basketball just it wasn't your safe zone anymore?
I think it was weird. It's a weird relationship you have with a sport when you play it for so long. Because I think in a way it was always a safe zone. Like I still feel that now. Like that actually never went away. I think what changed was my mindset about it. Like after my freshman year, I kind of believed that I wasn't capable of playing anymore because of what had happened with my brain and having to go to the hospital and spend a lot of time in intensive therapy and medication and all of that. And I really believed like, okay, I've had all this happen. So now I'm not capable and now I can't play anymore. And so I was scared of it not being a safe or comfortable place. And so I avoided it in a lot of ways, even though I was still playing, like I was still competing the rest of my 4 years in college, but I was checked out, like kind of separated myself from it a little bit. Yeah.
So, at first basketball was a thing that you were using to cope, it sounds like, and to escape. And then at a certain point, your mental health challenges, I guess, started to impact you and the game. So my question is, how did your mental health challenges impact your performance, if it did at all? Or and if it didn't impact your performance, how did it impact your relationship with the sport and everything that comes with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It definitely did impact my performance. I think I had very visible symptoms happening while I was competing, and like shout out to my teammates at the time for not ever getting frustrated or angry at me for those moments. They were incredibly supportive through that. But yeah, I mean, that was really, really tough. And a lot of those things still surface now. I think I have better coping mechanisms now, and I've changed how I view my relationship with basketball. Like it's more of a symbiotic kind of a thing. And I think in a lot of ways I lost a lot of confidence, and I lost my voice very much so. And that was something that I actually found in writing. And I kind of had a moment like a couple months ago where it was like this confidence in my voice, it didn't go anywhere. It just kind of transitioned into what I was doing with writing. And now I'm trying to bring that back into basketball, and kind of prove to myself that I didn't lose as much as I thought I did. And that relationship is mendable.
I really like that how you're trying to like prove to yourself and your past self and your younger self, all that you're capable of. And I was reading your letter to yourself, the Loops letter to myself, and I loved it. By the way, it was like I related to a lot of stuff, not in just like I'm not an athlete at all, but related like I loved your writing. Anyways, so in that new letter to yourself, you were writing about how you needed to trust the process, and you were telling yourself to trust the process. Can you expand on that a little bit more? Like, what does it mean for you to trust the process?
Guys have good questions. Trust the process. Yeah. I mean, I think it's something that I've been told over and over and over and over again. Like just trust the process, just trust the process. And that there's kind of nothing beyond that. And I think, when you're told that, I think you have to like, yes, I think it's a good thing to be told, but I also think you have to dig a little bit deeper and be like, okay, am I mentally okay and well enough to be on this path or process, and be like ingrained in it? Because something like sports is so unpredictable. Like you can train and train and train, but a basketball game or like any game, any competitive sport is unpredictable. So you have to kind of trust that your process through it as you grow and you get better and climb the athletic ladder, I guess you could call it. But in order to do that and be confident enough in yourself that you can do that, you have to be mentally well enough to do it, like commit to that in the first place. So that's, yeah, kind of how I think.
So what happens when you aren't, when you're not mentally well enough to trust the process? And maybe paint a picture for us of what does it mean to be mentally well enough to trust the process of, such magnitude, to be an elite athlete?
It's really hard, and be mentally well enough. I mean, to know where your supports are and that it's okay to fail and to take a step away from the process. Like one of my coaches described it as like a moving train. Like the train is always moving and it's always going somewhere. Like the process is always happening. But you can jump off the train for a little bit and take care of yourself and just take a step back and then hop back on the train again, at any point. Like the train's not going away. It's not going to disappear. Not David Copperfield. And and I think that's really hard though, as an athlete to recognize, because you're so told like you have to be mentally tough and you have to keep this game face on, and you're afraid that, if you do take that step back, like if you do say, I can't practice today because I'm hurting, and I need to take a step back, like there's a fear of repercussion for that, and you feel like your coach won't trust you anymore. And I definitely felt that too, like, okay, all of these things mental health wise have happened to me. Maybe my coaches don't trust me anymore. Maybe that's not why I'm playing, not getting floor time. And it just is a vicious, vicious feedback loop in your head. And so I think being mentally well enough to be on that path is the point when you develop the confidence to say, I'm not okay. And I don't know if confidence is the right word, bravery, courage, to walk up to your coach and say, whenever it is that you need a break and you take a step back. And I think that should be often, much more often than it is in sports.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like you need to take care of your mental health in order for your physical health and physical performance to be like the best of your abilities. And do you think that like the whole stigma around being like mentally tough just as much as you're physically tough in like today's athletes is like the stigma's kind of getting broken, or do you feel like it's stronger than ever?
Ooh, I think definitely more people are talking about it. Yeah, you have some really amazing professional athletes who are starting to open up about these things. And there's a lot of people who support them. But there's also a lot of people who don't. So I think it's really hard to tell. But I mean, athletics has always been based on your performance and doing this thing for other people and performing for other people. And that's that very sad mindset. It's terrible that gets kind of manifested into the athletes themselves. And I think, yeah, in some ways the stigma kind of like reinforces itself if, especially if coaches hold it and they kind of perpetuate it, often unintentionally. Like I remember coaches telling me that the person next to you is always doing more work, or like there's somebody who's always working harder than you. And it's not an inherently bad thing to say, but it's like, if you think about how you might internalize that, like, okay, I need to just be working all the time and never take a break. And opening up about something is considered like weak spirited. And I think all of those notions are very much alive and well, but, and that's kind of where like the difference between, awareness of something is different than acceptance and action. So, yeah.
So what's the impact of that attitude of, always having to work because the next person over there, they're Kobe at 3 a.m. in the gym. Like, so what's that like to just, be in that environment and to have that, reel in your head going over and over again?
Yeah. I mean, you always feel like you're not good enough, and like you're not doing enough. And that there's this standard of perfection that you can never reach, but that it's set as a standard anyway. And you're always compared to other athletes, and I just like other people, like athletes have different strengths. And thinking about that book that's like about a fish climbing a tree, I can't remember what it's actually called, but it's like like athletes have different strengths even within a sport. And so that comparison, that continuous comparison of work ethic and whether or not you're good at one thing or another, and that somebody's always working hard, like you just always feel like you're not good enough. And then when that gets mapped onto the fact that your performance and being good enough is your identity and your self-worth, that's a dangerous place to be. Yeah.
No, for sure. And touching back on what, like, I love the metaphor used earlier on how you can always get off the train. The train's not going anywhere. You can get right back on it. Do you feel like, at least in like your teammates that you see now, or like just other athletes, especially on social media now, where you can kind of track everyone's every move, do you find that more people are like taking that brave leap and getting off the train, fixing up their brain, and then, feeling okay and confident to get back on the field?
I definitely think more athletes are, but it's hard because like the stigma is still there.
Yeah.
And it's so strongly rooted. And I mean, the only way, that is the biggest barrier to help seeking, like research wise, is stigma. And I think it's that way, like not just in athletes, I think it's that way with almost everybody. And so if that stigma persists, then that culture of like, okay, I can't say anything, otherwise I'm gonna lose my starting spot, or like my coach isn't gonna trust me, or something bad's gonna happen. I'm not gonna be capable, like all those thoughts, that's still gonna happen regardless of whether you take that break. Like I stepped away many times in college, but I was that fear and that was always there. And I mean, I think we can do things when we're scared, but doesn't change the external reaction to it. So that was a very long-winded answer, but I think individual athletes are stepping away more often now, definitely.
Yeah, it's easy to see how important all is to you. And we definitely feel that it is important. This conversation is making me think about, this summer, or maybe, even this year, with, Naomi Osaka and what she was going through or is going through. And, first pulling out of the French Open, and then, with what happened at the US Open. I'm not going to go into it, but people can Google if they're not aware of what's happening. But, as an athlete who has struggled with mental health challenges, what was your perception of, or what is your perception of, Naomi Osaka and maybe how she has been treated in public or in the media?
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of two sides to it, because I think there has been a good amount of people who have been very supportive of her. And that's encouraging and good to see, as always. But I think there are a lot of people who are very unsupportive and who are saying horrible things about this duty or expectation that, it's her only job is to perform for everybody else. And that is incredibly untrue. I don't think that's anybody's job, let alone the best female tennis player in the world. And I just think it's incredibly brave, what she's doing. And but then I also think we're very behind in the fact that is something that's considered resilient and brave, because I think we should be further along, and that should be normal, to take a step back. So yeah, media could definitely do a bit of a better job.
Is there anything, I agree 100%, by the way, is there anything about, I guess, her story that resonates with you? and that maybe you've connected with. Maybe you could say a bit about that.
Yeah. I know she's talked a lot about like the anxiety and frustrations with interviews and the press and like post game or post competition interviews. Yeah. And how challenging those are and how much of an expectation I think there is to be this like super coherent, like I know exactly what I need to say, like, and I think everyone mocks athletes for their responses after a game, like, oh yeah, it was team effort and it was good, we did good. Like that's kind of the extent, but like I don't think like that gets spun as like, oh, athletes are dumb and athletes are all these things, and I don't think there's much context around that and around the emotional toll and energy that it actually takes to talk about some things, especially after a loss, like, and what that means in that moment. And you're being pounded with all of these questions, and like that is not a positive environment in a lot of ways. And I think the media also prize, right? Like they want to have a headline, they want to have clickbait, and they ask really like invasive questions a lot of the times. And I don't think anyone really thinks about how that impacts your psyche and how that impacts how you think about yourself and your performance and your worth and all of the things that we've been talking about. It just reinforces a lot of it.
Do you feel that like when the media is interviewing people like Naomi and she's being hounded with questions and the expectation that like she's not even just her, but like elite athletes are playing for other people, not for themselves. And they have this big expectation on their shoulders to do the best. Do you feel that like that like kind of mindset trickles down into like maybe athletes that are just starting out and they're like admiring all these elite athletes who would like put their best foot forward every day, and they're like, that's the mindset they get in. They have to be the best every day. And then do you feel like that kind of adds to the stigma of sports mental health?
Absolutely. And you said that really well. Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially as a young athlete watching all of that kind of unfolding, it's really hard because you're expected to put your best foot forward every day, and it's literally not possible.
No.
Not possible. And it's okay to make mistakes, but that's also not taught. You're taught the opposite. And the media, I mean, when you think about the media's job, it's like they're trying to tell their story and they're trying to get their article out there and like some kind of message that they already have in mind, I think, when they show up to like a press conference and whatnot. And I think, yeah, that expectation that athletes are performing for everyone who's watching definitely trickles down. Like, I'm not going to say like speak for all journalists or anything, because there's definitely really good journalists out there, but I feel like a lot maybe come in like, oh, it's, the athlete's responsibility to speak to me and give me their story and give me all these, great sound bites. And some days you can do that. Some days you can't. Like sometimes you have the energy to give a really good post-game press conference interview. And sometimes you're like, we just got smacked by 40 and I don't want to talk to anybody. And that should be okay. And like young athletes watching, it's hard for them to see that walking out is not an option, or like choosing, hey, like today is not the day for me to do this interview. That's not an option until very recently. So yeah.
No, so it sounds like there's this culture within athletics that doesn't allow space for folks to kind of, sometimes just kind of be human, much less, be open about their mental health challenges and what their needs are. What do you think, or how do you think we can change that? What can coaches do? What can fans do? What can the media do? What can we all do really to help change that culture?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, I don't know if I know all the answers. I definitely don't know all the answers. But I think the biggest thing is that mental health gets associated with being in crisis. It always does. And among many other things, but being in crisis, and you don't have to be in crisis to seek help. And that's one of the biggest pieces, I think, of stigma. And with media, with coaches, with athletes themselves, is like, oh, my problems aren't bad enough, or like I should be able to handle them on my own and shove them down. And I think that's a very subjective thing. And I mean, if you're having a rough time, you're having a rough time, and there's help, and there's varying degrees of help, and there's medication, there's treatment, there's just talk therapy. You just need to rant. And I mean, I think resources could be better. They could be more diverse and more inclusive. We're getting there, thankfully. But yeah, like going back to that crisis piece, like if coaches thought, okay, if one of my athletes is talking to a therapist, that doesn't mean that they're like needing to be hospitalized and that they're in this like terrible place where they actually can't contribute. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes people are in a really, really terrible place, and yes, maybe they need more intensive care, but I think those are more extreme cases. And that dynamic, I think, especially, and just recognizing that mental health is a continuum, it's not a binary, would be the biggest thing.
I've heard the term a lot, like in my life, of take your anger out on the field, take your anger out on the court,
Yeah.
skate your anger away, whatever sport you're playing. Do you feel like that's a healthy mindset, like to a degree, or do you feel like take your anger out on something else rather than dealing with like why you're actually angry? Do you think that adds to the stigma at all?
I think there's a time and place for both. I think there's definitely a time where, yeah, you got to distract yourself. Like there's too much going on in your head, and sports is a wonderful, or just being active in general is a wonderful way to kind of boost the endorphins in your body and just let all of that get out in a non-verbal way. But then there's also a time to sit with those things. And I think that's what we avoid a lot is, okay, I feel really angry right now. Maybe it's too much and I need to go and run around the block real quick and come back. And I'm going to sit and I'm going to just let myself feel it. And we're not very good at that. I don't think anyone's very good at it, let alone athletes. And yeah, just trying to find a balance between those and knowing when you need either. And that's something that's not taught, and I think should be, is knowing where that boundary is and when you need to do either one of those things.
What do you think people should know about athlete mental health?
A lot of things.
Tough one. It's a tough one.
That's a tough one. It is. I think athletes have there's a lot of very high performers in all different areas of work and life, like actors and, a whole bunch of people who are very high performers and very high achievers, which is attributable to athletes too. Mm-hmm. But I think what's very unique is how strong that relationship is with your sport, especially if you started playing at a young age, and how strong that athletic identity is and how it filters into every single part of your life. And knowing that you have to think about that at a younger age, because most athletes retire if they play professionally. And that's, a very small subset, but if they play professionally, like your max age you're going to retire at is like 40 and probably way sooner. And I mean, that doesn't match up with how you retire in other work areas, like 20-year difference. And when you retire and you walk away from sports and you don't have that other piece of your identity, or you haven't developed what else you're passionate about, or where else you might like to work, or what else you might like to do in your life, you're kind of left with this empty, alone, scary, confused, uncertain feeling. And I think that's avoidable. I mean, it's going to hit you no matter what, but it's avoidable if it's understood earlier on in your career. And when you're a kid, you don't get pigeonholed into like, okay, I'm going to be this elite athlete and nothing else. And I think parents are a little bit guilty of like, they want what's best for their kid and they push them really, really hard. But, there's a cost to that if you don't do anything else. And so, yeah, athlete mental health, I think it's understanding that relationship and making sure that that's not the only thing that's giving you life and hope and all of those good things.
I like that, like separating your sport from your identity, kind of.
Yeah.
What is, like, if you could sit down with yourself maybe like 10 years ago, what is just something you would say to yourself? Like the most important piece of knowledge that you have now after being through, like hell and back. What is just something you wish someone told you when you were younger?
Yeah. I'd say it's not as serious as you think it is. I think, how old would I have been? 13-ish. I think you feel like, especially when you're young, like everything is so much more serious than it is. Like, if I don't go to practice today, it's the end of the world and I'm never going to play again. It's just a lot of all or nothing when you're a teenager, especially a young teenager. So I think, I would tell myself that, like, it's not as serious as you think it is. And there are no consequences to saying that you need to take a day. And it's the same as like, if you got the flu, it's the same thing. So I would try and explain that to my 13-year-old self in a somewhat relatable way.
So now, we're talking about your athletic career a lot and your relationship with athletics. But we've been reading your writing, which is like ridiculously good. And clearly you're spending some time developing other parts of your identity, even if basketball was the main focus. Maybe can you tell us a bit about that, your journey with writing and how that's playing a bigger part of your life now, and how that's contributing to your wellness?
Yeah. I definitely I've always loved to write. I think I always have. I wrote little weird stories when I was a kid. But I think it really developed when I kind of not really lost basketball, but was forced to step away from it, and forced to find myself in other places and connect to other things. And writing, I think, just happened to be the medium that I could express myself through, and particularly fiction, I think. And so, yeah, I made kind of a not crazy decision, but a bit of an interesting decision my sophomore year in college, where I was like, okay, I'm studying human biology. I'm also going to minor in creative writing. And I know those two don't match whatsoever, but we're going to do it and try and make it work. And I mean, that was my saving grace, like being able to write stories and kind of have that creative outlet when basketball was not the best part of my life at that point, and it wasn't an outlet anymore. And it's very interesting because the period of time where I was less confident in basketball was when I wrote more, and vice versa. So it's interesting to think about. Yeah.
Did you ever feel like, like you said, like basketball, when it wasn't working, you leaned more on writing? And do you find yourself, like, in your fictional world, like writing about the frustration you had, like when you couldn't play basketball, when you were mentally, like, you just couldn't do it? Do you feel like you either, like, you wrote your strength, if that makes any sense? You wrote your strength in your stories, or you just, like, you just took your frustration out? And, like, how did you kind of deal with that?
Yeah. I definitely think, especially in fiction, I mean, I've written about stuff directly, like some of the things that I've experienced, I've written about directly. But in fiction, it's an interesting thing because a lot of the sad parts, or I don't know, emotional parts of a story, I mean, you have to pull that from somewhere. And I definitely think in a weird way, and I don't even know if I realized it in the moment, um, I drew on some of, at least the root of what I was feeling in certain things, regardless of where, like if the situation contextually was different in the story, which of course it probably was. But it's a nice reminder that of the root of a lot of what we go through, we all have the same feelings and emotions about it, and we can relate on that level. So it's very cool, yeah, to do that with fictional characters, because you get to create them and get to know them and become obsessed with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you said to us earlier that you're now, I guess, practicing getting in shape to play overseas professionally, I'm going to assume. And so now that you were on this basketball journey, there was a bit of a, let's say a speed bump, and you're back on the journey. How do you make sure that you're still able to balance your wellness with basketball moving forward?
Yeah. um I think I lean on my support system a lot, and I try and be as honest as I can with how I'm feeling. And I mean, this whole basketball thing and starting it up again, is a bit of a leap of faith. I think there's a part of me that knows there's a possibility that I can't do it, um, and that just because of some of the ways that my brain works. I was very changed after some of the things that happened, I guess 5 years ago now. Um, it did change the way I competed and performed. It absolutely did. I don't think that made me incapable, but it did change me for sure. And trying again now, I think I have a different mindset. Um, and I'd be okay with myself if I failed, if you would even call it failure. But if I couldn't do it, I would be okay with myself. I think what I wasn't okay with was not trying again. Um, and so like knowing that, and knowing that I don't really have anything to lose, and as long as I lean on the right people and resources at the right times, um, it's not a loss either way. And I'm just, yeah, I guess trying to hold on to that mindset as I go about this, and not get into that whole like my performance is my worth trap again.
I think that's really, really powerful. This sense of that you are never failing if you are still trying, regardless of what the result is. I love that, and I'm going to walk away this evening taking that with me. So thank you for saying that.
Just thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate it. I took a lot of advice with me after this.
Yeah, same for me. I don't know if you have any final thoughts, Mikayla, if you want to share them.
I mean, if I could say like a message to any young athletes who might listen to this, like, or even their parents or their coaches or their mentors or anyone who's working with them. Being a really good athlete is really, really hard, and it requires a lot of you, but it requires a lot of you mentally, emotionally, spiritually, as it does physically. So there's so many different realms that have to be taken into account. And you can't separate who you are from what you do. And I think all of that, kind of just thinking about it and having conversations about it, and not basing everything off of physical performance, is so important to remember, and try and keep in mind when you're when you're going about your training, when you're going about interacting with coaches and vice versa. Coaches and parents are encouraging and boosting up their athletes or their kids, boost their mental performance and their spiritual performance. And every time that they say, I need a break, like boost that up as much as, you know, their dunk, because they're both important and they both shape how successful you end up being as an athlete. So those are my final thoughts.
Well, thank you so much, Mikayla, for taking the time and being with us and sharing your story and your wisdom as well. You know, where can people find more about you and your writing and everything you're up to?
Yeah, probably easiest way is Instagram. Got a lot of links going on there. At Mick_Brew. It's my Instagram.
So,
And yeah, everything's linked in my bio if you wanted to read anything that I'm writing these days.
people should, because it's really good. Go ahead and read it.
Beautiful. It really is.
Thank you. That means a lot. And thank you for having me too. It's talking about this is never easy, but it's always so good and so worth it with amazing people like yourselves. So